Hello everyone. Today I would love to share with you my book review on this book, which I just finished reading. It's called Finding Truth by Nancy Pearcey, and I have talked about it before on this channel. And I would also love to share with you the next book that I'll be reading along with the online book club that I help co-host, Girl Talk Apologetics, and I'll be sharing about that book at the end of this video, so watch the full video. You may be watching this video and you may be very knowledgeable about Christian apologetics, or you may be wondering, what are you talking about? Something having to do with Christianity. Well, a little background before I talk about that. This author was the first woman that I heard about when I was researching women apologists 1 or 2 years ago. I can't remember anymore. But I had heard her name, and it was a delight being able to read one of her books for the first time and to learn more books that she has written, which I'll be sharing a short clip of the Q&A that we had with her in our book club. So I'll share that, a short clip and a link to the full Q&A in the description below. She is such a great writer. You really do feel like you're reading like a college book, a textbook, while at the same time it has a really personal feel to it. It's just, you can really hear this person's experience, and you can tell that this person is very genuine in the way that she writes. That's my impression as I read through it. It was a little challenging at times, so it was great reading through it with other ladies that I could learn from and that we could ask each other our questions. But for someone that may not be so knowledgeable about Christian apologetics, and you may not be familiar with a lot of the terms and things like that, this book was helpful in the sense that it introduces a lot of worldviews out there, even perhaps some worldviews that you might have been exposed to or that you may have, and you may not realize that those ideas actually come from like this part of history. And so it's a book that will definitely introduce you to a lot of things, and you would expect nothing less from a Bible college professor, which she is. So I feel like it's very informative, and it's a book that you'll be able to read again and pick up new things the next time around as well. A few takeaways from this book were just some of the explanations that she gives having to do with the Bible. It was very informative. Even the way that she starts off by talking about idolatry, and that it's not just necessarily a foreign concept in the past or in certain cultures in the world, but she connects that to other worldviews that people adopt, and they try to put those things in place of God, our creator. And she really goes into detail about all those things, which I won't try to do so in this video, but I recommend that you do go read that book to learn more about all of those things. And I feel like the way that it was written also, I feel like it was something that most Christians would agree with, like how she talks about free will and things like that. Another major takeaway for me from this book was how she reveals how a lot of these worldviews that people have, instead of the Christian worldview, how they fall short and how they contradict themselves often. And it really just goes to show that if we do a little digging, that there is a lot more to Christianity than what people may tease Christianity to be, and how they might want to present it as like a cartoon version of that, rather than the giant that it is. It stands taller among other worldviews. And it's very interesting to read about how there are a lot of philosophers that are aware that their worldviews fall short and they might not even be livable, but they prefer to live in that cognitive dissonance, rather than embrace, for example, Christianity. So the book really presents you with 5 principles for unmasking atheism, secularism, and other God substitutes. So it gives you a strategy for thinking through different worldviews. So instead of trying to memorize all of the arguments, you just have a strategy about how you can think through each worldview. And so that, I think, will always serve throughout life to really help you think more critically about things and not just adopting something at face value, and Christianity included. And the last thing, which was major, at the end of the book, I found myself like just very pleased that she was able to articulate, and the person that she mentioned, which is Lecrae, she quotes him because he quotes her. So both of them were able to articulate what has been my hope that this YouTube channel is all about. And I won't be able to articulate it as well as they did. But in other words, following Jesus is not just something you believe, but it's like figuring out how Christianity impacts this area and this area and that area. And I was just happy to kind of see that there are other people out there that are also aware of the importance that we need to, apply our Christian worldview into every area. There was something in my own life that I had to sort in my own experience growing up in like public schools, where it almost felt like I had a secular life, and then when I would go to church or at my home, that was my Christian life. And so there's this idea, I think, that is pushed to us Christians often, that we need to separate our Christian worldview from the rest of life. But actually, there is no such thing as separate. It's our Christian worldview. It's going to impact everything in our life. It's going to impact how we see the world. So let me just read a quote to you on page 273. And this is talking about Lecrae, something that he said in a conference presentation. "We've limited Christianity to salvation and sanctification," he said, "but Christianity is the truth about everything. If you say you have a Christian worldview, that means you see the world through that lens, not just how people get saved and what to stay away from." He's quoting from her other book, Total Truth, where he said, "The reason Christians hold back from being salt and light in the world is that they are trapped in the sacred-secular divide. We live fractured and fragmented lives. Church and family rarely speak to our work and public life. We navigate between two separate worlds. So that's why I was like, yes, someone else felt that way and also came to that realization where, hey, that's just not how our Christian worldview is meant to operate here in this life. This book is not necessarily saying that my worldview is equal to other worldviews or better than other worldviews, but it's actually saying, hey, the Christian worldview is truth. And so that is a huge thing for Christians to kind of shift from the things that we are being taught in our culture, the way that we're being trained to think that, you know, you have to respect my worldview and that's their truth, but actually when we are adopting the Christian worldview, then we are accepting that worldview as the truth, and that we can compare and see which worldview stands best and best describes reality. So that is my book recommendation. My book review, it also includes a few pages at the end with more information, and I believe it comes with a study guide. Some of the ladies followed along and found that helpful. So at the end of this video, I'm going to share with you how Nancy Pearcey walked us through her own journey about how she has started writing her books, which they all seem so interesting, and I would love to hear if you guys have read one of her books. Let me know your thoughts on them. And so she actually is one of the people that endorse the next book that we'll be reading for Girl Talk Apologetics, and it is this book. It's called A New Kind of Apologist, and the general editor is Sean McDowell. I wanted to read to you a couple of the endorsements for this book to encourage you to tell someone about our book club. It actually begins this coming Tuesday. And if you're watching this video in the future, then check out our website or our YouTube channel, Girl Talk Apologetics. The website is girltalkapologetics.com, and go search for the Q&As that we have there. Maybe by now, in the future, the Q&A will be there. So the first one, for example, is one that I want to read, but I also want to read to you the thing that Nancy Pearcey wrote, which I think and I hope will encourage you to join me. Russell Moore, the former president of the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, said, "Rarely do people become Christians after being humiliated in an argument." And if you're not aware of the definition of Christian apologetics, you might not understand why he's saying that. Christian apologetics, in other words, it's simply making a defense for Christianity. It could be about any topic that challenges Christianity, and so your response or your defense, you're responding to objections, or you're just talking about good reasons for why Christianity is true. So often within Christianity or the apologetics circle, you might find some people that are very passionate, but they often engage in arguments and trying to win rather than actually being more charitable in a conversation while they're discussing these things. So I agree. We shouldn't want to humiliate people. We should want them to become Christians. This book by leading thinkers calls for a Christian apologetics rooted in humility and love. Read this book and be armed to defend the faith and to love the lost. This is the kind of apologetics book that calls us not just to defend Jesus with our arguments, but to follow Jesus in our argumentation. Okay, and then Nancy Pearcey wrote, if you know someone with no background in apologetics, this is a great resource to get them started. It breaks out of the box by embracing what in my classes I call Worldview apologetics, showing how biblical truth makes better sense in diverse realms such as economics, politics, literature, science, gender, and race relations. Instead of crafting arguments in abstraction, it includes interviews with atheists to help Christians learn how to talk to real people. Under Sean McDowell's skillful editing, the style is clear, accessible, and most of all inviting. And I agree. I have just started reading the book, but already it's an easy read. The chapters are short, so we go from like one topic to the next, and it's a really good introduction. You don't really have to know so much or anything about apologetics, and you can be introduced through this book. And we're really looking forward to the discussions that we're going to be having with our book club. Often we learn the skills, the apologetics arguments, but then it's like, well, how do I do that in real life? You know, how do I talk to this person that is being difficult or is challenging, or that I'm seeing these things in their life and I want to reach out to them? How do I do that? And so this book is going to help us to take a closer look and to be better prepared as to how we can think through these things and really truly be more loving and hopefully more effective as we share about the truth of Christianity. So if you would like to join me and my other two co-hosts, Patty and Ann, and the ladies that have signed up so far, please go to our website and sign up there, or you could also just send us an email, girltalkapologetics@gmail.com, and let us know that you want to join this new book discussion for a new kind of apologist. Or if you might not be able to join, why don't you go ahead and get this book and read along, and you'll be able to see our Q&A pretty soon. So thanks for watching this video. If you would love to support me and the things that I'm doing, go down to the description of this video and check out that link that gives you more information about how you can support everything that I'm doing, as well as if you don't want to go to that link, give me a thumbs up on this video and share it with someone that you know. Invite someone to this book club and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And here's the short clip of the Q&A with Nancy Pearcey that I promised you I would share at the end of the video.
They always come out of my own experience. I think if they don't, they don't have the authenticity. And so, for example, my first book was The Soul of Science, and I had been working for 13 years for an organization that dealt with science and Christianity and culture. So I had been writing on it for 13 years. So I was deeply immersed in questions of, not just science, but how does science affect Christian worldview? Because that's what Soul of Science is about. It's the relationship of science to Christianity from the time of the scientific revolution. So I wanted to kind of get that interaction between science and Christianity, especially how Christianity formed the basis of modern science. As one prominent historian said, no other culture, East or West, ancient or modern, has even thought of the concept of natural laws in terms of nature. Most of us take it for granted. We've grown up with it. But this historian who's not a Christian said that came explicitly out of a Christian worldview. It came out of the Middle Ages when Europe was thoroughly permeated with a Christian worldview. So that's my main goal with that book. Total Truth came out of, I had been working at Prison Fellowship for many years, and you may know, I co-authored a book with Chuck Colson called How Now Should We Live? A big fat book. And And at the time, I wondered, it's about Christian worldview, but I wondered why this was such a difficult topic for Christian people to really grasp. What was it about Christian worldview that, what were the barriers in people's minds? And so that was total truth. Total truth was, well, the main barrier in people's mind is the sacred secular split. They really don't understand that Christianity is not just about the religious sphere, church and Bible study, but it really is meant to be truth about all of reality, about your work and your vocation, about science and about politics and about economics, about the arts and every other field. So that was the motivation. In essence, total truth was a response to how now should we live. And then, what was the next one? But Saving Leonardo is about the arts. And a lot of that came out of my time at L'Abri when I was, I went to L'Abri as a non-Christian. L'Abri is the ministry of Francis Schaeffer. And Francis Schaeffer not only was known for his apologetics, but also for his encouragement of Christians to get into the arts, that the arts were important, that creativity was important. And so his main book on the subject was How Now Should We Live? How Now Should We Live? My book with Chuck Colson was How Then Should We Live? No, I got it mixed up. Schaeffer's was How Then Should We Live, which is a quote from Ezekiel. And we followed it up with How Now Should We Live? A little bit of a joke. But I always wanted to do something on the arts just because of my heritage of having become a Christian at L'Abri. And how does philosophy interact with the arts? How do ideas find expression through the arts? And so Saving Leonardo was my chance to do that, to kind of have the creative and the cognitive, together. It's probably my favorite book because it addresses the whole person. And I'm not going to tell you why I love thy body. No, just kidding. But I really can't tell you because the reason I wrote it is because people very close to me in my family who were struggling with these issues, with homosexuality, with transgenderism, and it's not they're in the book under pseudonyms. But I do want you to know when you read that book, it's coming very much out of personal experience. And sometimes very painful personal experience with people in my own family. So again, it means it was a painful book to write, but it means that's why it sounds authentic. It wasn't just an intellectual exercise. People very close to me and very near and dear to me and who I love very much. What else? Oh yeah, so Finding Truth. Finding Truth, the one we're talking about today. That was one where I came to realize that I was using a lot of apologetics arguments, but because I always write books on culture, our apologetics was always intermixed. It was intermixed with the science, in solar science. It was intermixed with the arts in Saving Leonardo. It was intermixed with sort of, analysis of evangelicalism and total truth. And I thought, what would happen if I just took out the apologetics arguments themselves so that people could actually see the arguments, it's kind of like taking out the structure, the skeleton. It's taking out the skeleton, the argumentative skeleton of all my other books and saying, let me teach you just the logic itself, just the logical strategies themselves. And then that's proven to be one, I'm teaching it right now in my class. I teach it at Houston Baptist University and I'm teaching it now. And it's turning out to be the best, the best of all of them in this sense. When I became a Christian, I thought I had to memorize all of these secular isms. And you're nodding. You went through that too. I thought I had to memorize every secular ism out there. And then I had to memorize every objection. And I soon realized that would take a lifetime. And so while writing Finding Truth, I discovered that there was a strategy that you could use. If you master this plan of action, you could apply it to any worldview. And so it equips you to encounter anything, any set of ideas, any objection to Christianity that you might encounter. And so in that sense, it turns out it's, when my students finding out, I'll just give you one example. So you're going to ask me this question later anyway. I'm teaching C.S. Lewis's argument from rationality. That's his argument that if you start with naturalism, you cannot explain why reason is valid, because reason is, the ideas in our brain are there by natural forces. That's what naturalism says. All our ideas are products of natural forces. Today, we would say neurons firing in your brain. And neurons firing in your brain can't be true or false. It's just a biological fact about your brain. Well, when I was a young Christian, I read Lewis and I memorized that argument. But now I tell my students, okay, it's a strategy. Every non-Christian worldview that reduces reason to something less than reason, some physical, psychological, economic forces, you can make C.S. Lewis the same argument. So, for example, Marxism says, you don't believe what you believe because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because of your economic interests, right? You're the proletariat and the capitalist. For him, all your ideas come from your economic situation. To which we say, what about you, Marx? Doesn't that mean your ideas are products of your own economic interest? In which case, why should we pay any attention to it? Or Freud says, you believe what you believe, not because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because of your psychological history, especially sexual repression. To which you say, well, what does that mean for your own ideas? Freud, where did they come from? Onto the couch yourself, Dr. Freud. Or today, postmodernism says you don't believe what you believe because you're rationally persuaded it's true, but because your reason is overcome by social forces like race, class, gender, sexual orientation. To which you say, what does that mean for your own views? Are they just products? Are you a mouthpiece for your own race, class, gender, sexual orientation? In which case, why should we pay any attention to it? Or the fastest growing idea on secular campuses today is something called evolutionary psychology. And it says your ideas, if the brain evolved by natural selection, so did the ideas in your brain. And so the ideas that stick around are the ones that win out in the struggle for survival because they're useful. To which you say that idea itself then is not really true or false. It's just useful for survival. So I've taken Lewis's argument and I've shown, hey, this is not just an individual argument that you memorize. It's a whole strategy that you can apply to virtually any non-Christian worldview. So that's the difference with finding truth, is I've given you a strategy that you can apply to any worldview. I'm working on a book on toxic masculinity. And what I'm doing is I'm showing it's an academic book. Okay, there are books out there that are sort of screeds. They're sort of screeds, like screeds against feminism, because feminism says that masculinity is toxic, and so they're kind of books that are like screeds arguing back against the feminists. So this is not one of those. It's very historical. What I do is I show where the concept of toxic masculinity came from and how it developed over history. It has much deeper roots than most of us realize. And then I give so it's very fact-based. I give a lot of historical facts. And then to counter it, I give another sociological facts. It's fact-based as well, but it's sociological facts. And it's fascinating that sociology has been a very secularized discipline. But in recent decades, Christians have been going into the field and have been doing studies of Christians, conservative Christians, and that they're overturning a lot of the negative stereotypes that secular people have. For example, secular people say that Christians are more prone to domestic violence and abuse because they believe in male headship in the home. And 90% of them do, by the way, of those who identify as evangelicals do accept some concept of male headship in the home. But when they did sociological studies, they found out that evangelical family men actually are more loving to their wives, more engaged with their children, have lower rates of divorce, and have the lowest rates of domestic violence of any group in America. So that was really cool. Of course, I wanted to trumpet that abroad. I wanted to make a big deal out of that. Now, I get pushback by people who say, yeah, but haven't really heard that Christians have the same level of divorce and abuse as the rest of society? Yes, we do. So researchers went back to the data and they divided it out to evangelical family men who attend church regularly and nominal evangelicals. In other words, men who will check Baptist on the survey box because they live in Georgia. My husband's from Georgia, so I can say that. But really, who rarely attend church, if ever, but it's sort of it's a cultural Christianity. If you look at nominal Christian evangelical men, their wives report the lowest level of happiness in their marriage. They're the least involved with their children. They are more likely to divorce, but here's the real stunner. They have the highest rates of domestic violence of any group in America, higher than secular men. So clearly the church has a job to do. These are men apparently who hang around the Christian subculture, enough to pick up words like headship and submission, but to read them through a lens of the secular script that defines them in terms of dominance and control. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, there's really good news that really committed Christian men do better than any group in America, and nominal Christian men do worse than any group of men in America. So those are some of the kind of things I'm dealing with in my new book.